Chapter 27, Chapter 17, The Omega, the Coping Stone. If the question were asked, how long ago was it that man appeared on Earth, my answer would be, without question, in the Tertiary era. I cannot state the number of years, no one can. Man today has no more conception of how many years ago the Pleistocene commenced, or the length in years of any geological time, era, or period than the ancient fossil on my library table. Under the great law of creation, there must first come a condition, and with it a suitable life to live in it. A condition has already been subject to the workings of the Earth's primary force. Throughout the history of the Earth this has been so, and at no time do we find the new creation behind the condition, because the condition is the parent of the creation or development. When was the condition for man's appearance on Earth perfected? The condition for the welfare of man was far advanced at the end of the Oligocene, and was well advanced, if not absolutely perfected, during the latter half of the Miocene or the beginning of the Pliocene. This was long before the great gas belts were formed, long before the mountains were raised, and long before the geological glacial period. I have placed before my readers such reasonable proofs that it is clearly shown that first, at one time in the Earth's history, there was a great continent of land in the Pacific Ocean, where now we find only water and groups of small islands. Second, this land in ancient times had two names, a geographical and a hieratical. The hieratical name was Mu, the geological, the lands of the West. Third, in this land man made his advent on earth. Fourth, man was a special creation and not of nature's making. He came fully developed in form, but required education and mental development. Now what is man? James D. Dana says, man is not of nature's making. He is a special act of the infinite being, whose image he bears. I cordially agree with Dana, but by an irresistible force I am compelled to go further. All endeavors to determine when man first appeared on earth must be futile. It has always been a veiled secret, and must remain so, because man's first home on earth with this secret now lies at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. We can, however, hope through geological and archaeological research to be able some day to get to a point near the date of his first appearance on earth. Many scientists have declared the belief that mankind descended from some forest beast, some monkey of prehistoric origin. Their contention must therefore be that man, having descended from a monkey, is a monkey still in a developed state. I have shown that man was on earth, and from the quality and perfection of his works, in a high state of civilization during the later part of the Tertiary era. It is shown that he must have been in existence an immensely long time before the end of the Tertiary era. This would certainly make him contemporary with the first apes who resembled men. If evolution were possible, which the old Nakal tablets show is not, the reverse would have occurred. That is, monkeys would have come out of man. Man, the most complex of all forms of life, and the most perfect form of life, was created for a special purpose, as pointed out in the Nakal tablets. Man is an animal of the order of mammals, distinct and different from all other animals, due to the fact that he has associated with his body a force or soul for the purpose of ruling the earth. This great gift has been bestowed on no other form of life, which proves conclusively that man is a separate and distinct creation possessing a divine force. It is impossible that he can have come out of or evolved from some animal not having that force. Man with his force has been given the power, when he learns how to use his force, to place himself next to the infinite being, a part of which he has within himself. A man is therefore a son of God. Like all other creatures, man has started at the foot of the ladder, but unlike all other creatures, he is given the power to rise. Man has always been surrounded by influences striving against each other for good and for evil. Man's actions are governed by these influences. The soul's affinities can only suggest that which is good. Evil suggestions come from the material affinities or elementary parts. Material suggestions are not all evil, only some. The material affinities can suggest evil, the soul's affinities cannot. Egyptian papyrus. Now if this is a parable, in a sense it is true, since a spirit is at the elbow of everyone, or rather there are two spirits, one good and one evil, one leading upwards, one leading netherwards. The soul and its affinities suggest to the mind, the material affinities also suggest to the mind. The mind determines for the body which suggestion shall be followed. Conscience is the mouthpiece of the soul to the mind. Bodily actions and words from the mouth are the indications of the powers or influences that are controlling the mind. The material interests or affinities may control the mind of man for a time, but before the earth can end her existence, man's soul must reign supreme over his mind and body. At the commencement of man's existence, the material affinities were very powerful, owing to the lack of experience, so that advancement was necessarily slow. Time went on, one generation followed another, and man began to rise step by step towards his preordained goal, the ascendancy of the soul's affinities over the material affinities. The time must come when all of men's actions and thoughts will be governed solely by the dictation of the soul. This was the task given to the soul to perform when it was placed within man's body at his creation, to govern this earth. By the advancement of man, as indicated by science and learning, he is now only approaching the threshold of knowledge. When knowledge is complete, which can only be when man understands and can control certain earthly forces, which will enable him to understand his own greater force, then the works of man will be beyond our present comprehension. With his soul force thoroughly understood by himself, man will be incapable of evil thoughts or actions. Man will then be able to accomplish anything that may be dictated by his soul, because the soul will have no influences working against it. Then the works of man will be good, because his soul will be incapable of evil. We have as yet been looking only at man's past. Let us for a brief moment look into his future and see what destiny holds in store for him. All things point to a time when man will have perfect control over all of Earth's elements and many of her forces, a state to which he is now advancing. The power of his soul force is only now beginning to dawn on present man. There are many strange phenomena, or apparently so, where objective points are reached through working the soul force, and yet the one accomplishing them is not aware that he is doing so by the aid of a force. He discovers he has a power, but does not know what power is. He only knows the results. In some way he has been advanced far enough to work his soul force in a limited direction, yet does not understand it. The great mysteries of the Hindus, Polynesians, Egyptians, and of biblical miracles are and were the results of working the soul force. The knowledge of both the Hindus and the Polynesians is peculiar. They appear to be somewhat proficient along certain lines, but extremely inefficient in others. It would seem they have no conception that the force they are using can be used in any direction except along certain lines. Christ was the perfect example of the soul force being in perfect control over the mind and body. He appeared on earth as others did before him, in fulfillment of the great divine law. Man's mind had arrived at the condition. Christ was placed on earth as an example for man, to teach and to show what man eventually must become. The development is now going on. Man must become perfect, otherwise the great divine law will have miscarried. As the law is divine, it cannot miscarry. It is a regrettable yet notable fact that many of our great scientists became atheists and have as a rule been advocates of the theory of evolution. The fact remains that a true evolutionist cannot be anything but an atheist. It is yet more regrettable that they became atheists when they were struggling in the opposite direction, for science, fully understood, cannot but impress the student with the power and mystery of the Great Supreme, the Deity. Science is the twin sister of religion. Science, properly studied, cannot help making man a better being, for it teaches him that he himself is a higher and a greater creation than he has ever before appreciated. It gives an impetus and a determination to his soul force to gain its preordained ascendancy over the mind and the body's material affinities. It teaches him that within his house of clay there is an everlasting life. At every step the hand of God is revealed, and above all it teaches him that by following the suggestions of his soul, everlasting glory and happiness await him. The rock on which many scientists have wrecked their ships is materialism. In their studies, they have eliminated forces and their workings, saying a force is the result of atomic movements. True, all forces are, except the force which first starts atomic movements. This is the force the atheist has never found. Consequently, he built his structure without considering it. He found only the minor forces originating from atomic movements. He never came in direct touch with God. The movements of atoms are cogwheels in a piece of machinery. One turns the one it is meshed into, this one in turn turns others, and so on ad infinitum. But what turned the first wheel? Not any other wheel, because it was the first. Therefore there must be something at the back of it. What is it? A force independent of all atoms. The universe is a set of atomic cogwheels. What turns the first wheel in the universe? A force, the great primary force, the great infinite force, God. The atheist has never discovered that God is the great primary force, working all things through subsidiary forces, and that the atomic forces are only subsidiary forces to the supreme force. Thus the atheist has only studied the material side. His deductions would naturally be, elements govern forces because without the elements the forces could not exist. This being so, forces are cast aside as being immaterial and are virtually obliterated from consideration. The rudder is taken from the ship and she is cast on the rocks. Throughout all the deductions and conceptions of the atheist, his mind has been governed absolutely by his material affinities. His material affinities have persuaded his mind that they are the all-powerful. Nothing now remains in the mind of the atheist except that he is a mere chemical compound of elements, no soul, no God, chaos. Had the atheist given his careful study to forces as he did to elements, constantly working back and back, following one force to another, eventually he would have come to the origin of movement. It would then have been disclosed to him that he himself contained a force other than physical, and that force was a living soul. With this knowledge he would realize what he is, not the poor brute beast he is trying to make himself out to be, but one who has within himself an actual part of the Supreme, and is a son of God, just as the leaf of a tree is part of the tree itself. Both Christ and Gautama declared they were only what other men might become. By this chemical knowledge of elements, the scientist appreciates that the chemical elementary compound of his body must eventually decompose, and that this decomposition must release the soul. As he knows the ultimate finality of his elements, he knows that the soul, like the elements, cannot die. All must continue on forever, for elements decomposed pass on into other forms. It is preordained that all chemical elementary compounds must eventually decompose, separate, return to original form, and go back whence they came. The elements have released the soul from its bondage. The soul, being governed by the same divine law as the elements, must also return whence it came. Coming from the great source, the glorious triumphant end of man's soul must be its return to God.